Hello and welcome to a Blood and Pigment hobby video. I'm Joseph, and today I'm going to be working on using contrast paints mostly to paint up a French Canadian Militia model. I've already primed it. I did a zenithal priming with a gray base and then white over the top of that, but then I also dry brushed it pretty heavily with white because the contrast paint doesn't like to go over the gray very well. So especially like the face and anything at all upturned, I've made sure it's pretty white. As far as colors, I am using a couple things for inspiration. The Firelock minis, they're pretty simple. They have one big shirt, solid color. I'm going to use white and some other art I found. These guys are pretty basic, classic French colors, red, white, and blue. I'm going to pretty much copy that color scheme. Here's another out of this book. It was a little close, sorry. Cold Weather, French Canadian Militia. So pretty basic. I'm going to try to go start to finish, hoping to do 15 to 20 minutes. I think it's possible with contrast paints. It's made it possible to get a lot more painted for me recently, even though they aren't as, there's not quite as much control. I think the product isn't quite as good when I'm done, but it's worth it to get some on the table. Here's one that I painted up this week. I'm going to use a little more red in this one. I'm going to paint today, maybe a little bit lighter for the leather. There's some not contrast in there for metallics and eyes and things like that, but we're going to try to use mostly contrast paints. I found the best method of to approach it with is to do dark colors first, because if you mess up with dark colors, you got to go back with your white and touch up those, because if you put a light color over dark color, it's not opaque enough to cover it up. So you're constantly having to do some touch-ups if you're a little messy. So my plan is to do his hat red, his shirt white, his pants blue, and then this last, he has this leather, I think, calf garment. So I'm going to do that brown, and then various colors brown for leather and musket. So I've also found a bit of a trick. If for certain colors, it can improve the look if you put a base color down other than white, which kind of doubles your work, but sometimes it's worth it. Like this guy, I use this light tan, yellowish tan underneath, and then put the snakebite leather contrast over the top, and it turned out pretty good. So I'm going to do that to start with. It's a bit of extra work, but I think it makes it a little better for some of these colors, especially the more transparent browns. So I'm going to do this basic leather pieces. This, I guess this is a cartridge box here, leather satchel thing. And I try to keep a little water in my brush and then just dip straight out of the Citadel bottle, because it's super fast for me. But you do need to water most of these Citadel paints down a little bit. I'm using a pretty old and battered size 1 Winsor and Newton brush. These are really nice. They don't last forever, especially if you use them a lot. But the Winsor Newton Series 7 are considered the best. At least I consider them the best, what I found. The last couple of months, at least, depending on how much you paint and how well you take care of them. Down here, I'm not sure exactly what's going on. There's these two little flaps coming out underneath the powder horn, which is underneath the cartridge box. Since I don't know what they are and I couldn't find an image, I'm going to paint them the same color as the cartridge box. So these minis are some of the newer minis that Biolock has released. One of their fire starters. I think they have a new sculptor for this set of minis. The Braves, the Indian Fighters, French Canadian Militia. And I like them. They're very dynamic poses. Some of them, I feel like the sets of miniatures have a lot in common as far as their poses, which is kind of nice. Makes them look unified on the board, but also makes them a little less exciting or varied. I got this French guy also squatting a little bit, this guy hunching, and this guy shooting, but he's also hunching. So like all the French Canadians are hunchy. That's okay. All right, there's the undercoat, which I'm not going to do that for any other colors, just this brown. I think it's a valuable technique to have. If you put your contrast paint on and it just looks splotchy and nasty, try putting that undercoat of a lighter shade of what you're aiming for underneath and see if that clears things up. All right, we'll let that dry. I'm going to put my base color down. I'm sure you all have a standard color for your decking. I use XV88. I don't know anything fancy. I just get this nice, even, pretty heavy, and then I'll put a shade over it later. And I don't even bother dry brushing. It's just a deck. Nobody cares. I've seen some people go ahead and base some of the minis, like the natives that are always on, or usually on land. These guys will be too, really, in most cases. But I like all mine uniform, and if I don't have to spend extra work basing them, I won't. It takes a good while. Alright, now I'm going to do his pants. I'm going to make them blue, kind of like these guys here. This is one of the darkest colors, so I'm starting with it. I could use a bigger brush, but I'm going to keep the small one right now. Now, this paint is really thin and tends to get loaded up on your brush more than you want, and then your brush widens out and it's fat and it's hard to be detailed. So how much, or the quantity of paint that you allow on your brush is pretty important. You want enough to work with, but not enough where you just have no control and no point anymore. Unless you're doing a big area, and then you can just blob it on, really. The French Canadian Militia looks like a pretty good unit. I think it is, although in spite of itself. I haven't played any lists with him since No Peace Beyond the Line came out until recently, because there was no minis, and I just have mental block for playing units, so I don't have a mini for them. And the Caribbean Militia definitely don't represent Canadian Militia very well. These guys have a strange stat line. It's all bad except for their shoot, which is usually where it counts. Underneath this little skirt here is kind of annoying, and you don't always have to do it. I'm just going to put a lot of blue under there so you don't see any jarring white or metal from any angle. But if you're looking at it from above, You'll never see it. Their stat line is 7 fight, which is quite bad. 7 fight save, which is pretty standard. And then 6 shoot, that's their strength. And 7 shoot save, which is standard. 6 resolve, which isn't good. And then they have scouts, so they can move through area terrain without any issue. And elusive, which makes them harder to hit, so that basically brings their save down to 6 if they're all in cover. And then marksman is a really cool ability. It's not on a whole lot of units, so they can spend 2 actions to get a -1 bonus, so that they can, with 2 actions, they can bring their base shoot down to 5, which is super good. All that for only 4 points trained. So you don't want to get them wrapped up in melee, but if you can keep them in the woods, keep them in some cover and shoot, it seemed like really good value. You could fit 50 of them in a 200-point list if you wanted. $50 trained with a 6 shoot. Be fun. All right, now I'm using snakebite leather over this. What color was that I used earlier? Morghast bone for his cartridge satchel thing, belt and straps. I'm gonna do the knife a darker color, I think. It's very wet and thin paint, so it tends to follow the contours of the mini pretty well. You don't have to push it very often, but that means making it precise can be a little tough. So usually I got to go back with white and touch up along these lines, like for this strap kind of business. Hope you can see okay. This is my first time using this setup. I got my camera closer, hoping that'll help some of the volume. I know my last couple attempts at recording, my voice came through pretty quiet. So let me know how this is. All right, I'm going to use this same snakebite leather for his. I was going to use it for musket, but I think I'll just do it for I'll do a darker color for the musket. I'll do this for the tomahawk or axe handle. Kind of have to check back to everything you did once or twice, because this strange paint tends to wick up a little bit, and sometimes you'll cover it and then it'll just bead up and leave a spot dry, or just leave a little white dot that you just need to go back and smooth out. All right, I like that color pretty well. Not too dark, not too light. It has some contrast to it. All right, now we're going to do a darker brown for the musket, shoes, and knife. I'm going to use Sigor brown. This is quite dark. I was torn about what color to do the musket. Walnut is pretty dark, but I've seen some wood use as pretty light as well. I think this dark will contrast nicely with the silver bits. So I'm hoping this is good. I find this covers fairly well. I'm going to make sure to shake it up, because if you don't, really good. If you don't, if I haven't given it a good shake, sometimes it comes out all glossy and gross because it's separated. Yeah, getting really detailed spots like this around his hand can be difficult with a contrast. You might have to go back and touch it, but I think I'm going to get it. I'm not being too careful about where the musket barrel is going to be, because I'm going to just use a standard conventional paint for that. So if I go over, it's fine. Do the cap of the powder horn, dark brown too, so it doesn't just blend in. And the bands. Then his shoes. That's one funny thing with these running models. The foot that's running tends to be really large. I don't know if you can see that, but it's bent, and they need it. It's a very long foot. You put it all together. So this model can be used in several forces. I was actually surprised looking through the French section. It's obviously a core unit in the French Canadian Militia force. Probably gonna be your bread and butter there. There's also a French Canadian privateers force that you can use this in. Probably, well, it might be okay. It has 7 shoot save, but the elusive doesn't help when you're on a ship. To the knife too. Might be a little dark for the knife. I'll do it. Looks fine. You also can bring them in the French Canadian or French Expeditionary Force, which is a really interesting force to build with. And then in the new stuff coming out in Raise the Black, they are available as support units in the French Army, which is going to feature the regulars, and the French Raiders. All right, done some basic colors here. Let's do red next. I'm going to give him a red hat and a red scarf. He has a little bandana thing around his neck. You can hardly see it, but it's there. And that usually gets me in trouble. I'll probably have to patch up the skin on that. This is Flesh Terrors red. I'm going to try to do the scarf bandana first. Also not entirely sure if his open fatigue blouse sort of thing is over a shirt, or this is just a big V-neck and that's skin. I'm going to do it skin, but you could really do it either way. Put a bit of color around the back. Yeah, got little spots. And the hat. The hat you could paint with a different color of band around the head. I've seen some that have just white or gray or fur, brown or gray fur. I'm just going to do it all red. That's what the example painted miniature on the Firelight site is, and it's easy and fast for this purpose. So I guess the best model to compare this to is the Engagé, another 4-point model with 6 shoot. And a 6, I have a 6 save too, that's good, I believe. This one is better because it's trained and it's not timid, and it has marksman. Seems pretty strong. Other strange thing you can do is put thrown weapons on them so they can hit harder in a charge. But with a 7 fight score, that's not particularly impressive. That's 40%. And then 40% of the fails. So that's something like a little more than 50% really hits, which isn't impressive. But if you're relying on these guys for the main body or force, having a couple big units with thrown weapons would be good. All right, this is Contrast Agaros Dunes, and I'm going to use that for the pieces around his calves. Pretty much everything I looked at had this as a light leather color. I like this paint. It's not very opaque, but if you have good prime base down, it finds those cracks real nice and looks pretty smooth. All right, let's do, let's do the powder horn that color too. Looks like powder horns could be a variety of shades, being horns. They have variation, but a cream color with some dark near the base or dark spots or near the tip seems to be pretty common. All right, just let some of that dry and do another boring part. I do the rim of my bases all with iron oxide, just a dark brown. And my iron oxide has started to dry out, so it's a little bit difficult to get my paint out. Next, we'll do the skin. Enough. Now I'm going to just go over it a bit with some of this white. I use an off-white. This is called a white gray, different line of paint. My local store started carrying. Just going to use this to touch up some of my blips here and there. It's really thin paint. It's nice to work with. Sometimes it doesn't cover as much as I wish it would, but these straps are real obvious if you bleed them over into the cloth, so I always want to make sure I get those nice and neat. Bit on his thumb. I should have got that with my knife earlier. Ooh. Okay. I didn't obsess over the mold lines, and now it's showing. But can't make everything perfect. Alright, this is a basic skin color. Guillemot flesh, Guillemot, I assume. I'm not a Warhammer person. I think all these names are based off of that. But I'm usually pretty happy with how this comes out for the skin. I'm going to do his chest as well. None of the other minis in the set have this issue, but the example in the Firelock site has it. This guy's a big yellow shirt and then white underneath as like an undershirt. But since I'm going to do a white shirt, I didn't want to do the undershirt white too. So I feel like it takes me about 15 to 30 minutes a mini using contrast. 15 if I work quickly and don't obsess over eyes and things. I feel with conventional methods where I do a base or prime, base coats, shades, highlight. I think it takes me at least an hour, if not sometimes considerably more per miniature. So I've been going back and forth. I'll do some contrast stuff and be happy that I'm getting a bunch done. Then I'll look at them compared to my other ones and feel guilty that I didn't do them as nice. And then I'll go back and do some regular ones and I'll take forever and I'll get annoyed. And then I'll go back and do some more contrasts and feel guilty. It's a happy cycle. And with this, you can kind of layer it, like you can put 2 coats on the under part of his arm, and it gives it a little bit of a shadow shading effect. Helps the already natural. All right, skin, easy. Now I'm going to do his hair black. Black Templar. I like this paint pretty well. Black is kind of a pain to paint conventionally, where you usually don't want to use true black. You use a dark gray and then do a wash and then highlight with a lighter gray. But this looks almost like a green to start with, but it dries quite nice and lets the raised areas come up to gray. I've been using this on quite a few minis lately. Sorry, I bumped the camera, it wiggles. Like one of the big dangers with contrast is leaving spots that didn't have a little bit of white between one color and the other. You're trying to be careful not to let it bleed. You can actually be putting on too light. That's another problem. All right, we're reaching the end of the contrast needs. To do the knife handle, I'm going to use this reddish brown just for something different. Gorgruntifer. something different. All right. All right, let's do metal. I use and highly recommend the Vallejo metal color line. They have like 12 different colors of silver and only a couple golds and coppers, so not so good there. But there's still there. This is amazing stuff. It's not cheap, $7 or $8 or something a bottle, but it covers really well. Paints on really smooth, really easy to work with, blends well, doesn't separate. I do not like the Citadel metallics, and a friend recommended these. I choked at the price, bought a couple and used them, and then bought more. And now all my Citadels are dried up and dead because I haven't used them so long. Which will not happen with these because I have an intelligently designed container, unlike Citadel. Pretty much can do all the hardware on the musket. This steel color. This is really thin paint too, but it covers really well. The steel is pretty dark, so I have another silver that I highlighted up with later. Tomahawk and musket hardware, make sure to get the trigger area. That can be easy to miss. Lock, barrel. And it's smart to use a different water cup for your metallic paint because the little bits get in your water and then stick in your brush. Oh, missed the tip of the musket. And there's little keepers for the ramrod down here that can be wood sometimes, or you can make them brass, but it looks like they were usually steel as well. And then I can just belt buckle brass. You could do it steel as well, but I like a little bit of extra contrast, bright color there. All right, now I'm going to throw the wash on the base. Nothing complicated here. I just put a good dollop of good old Agrax Earthshade all over the deck. I'm going to run this over the silver dried pretty fast over this too, just to give it a wash. It's looking pretty good. Looks like I have a... Did I just do that? Yeah, I did. Just got to drop a wash on his shirt. I'm going to use the white contrast paint on his shirt in a second, so I'm going to go over that and touch it up. But it really looks pretty good. Oh, some around his belt. Second layer over that red. And while we wait for that to dry a little bit more, I'm going to try the eyes. Everybody Loves doing eyes. I take a teeny tiny brush, use a ivory, or I'm using the gray white, just a teeny bit on, and then do a little tiny sliver. Sometimes it gets big, you can touch it back up. But what you don't want is googly eyes, so don't put a big old blob. If you don't have a really good brush, it can be depressing. Just, you can forego the eyes. But if you have a really tiny brush, it is possible. And this is German tank crew. German gray is better. But as long as it's dark, you can do a pupil with this. Let's see if I can do it without getting googly. Oop, a little cross-eyed. Sometimes you can make the pupil a little bit bigger, and it's okay. Well, that isn't great, but it gives him some life, even if he's a little crazy. All right, I think this is getting towards our last step here. I'm going to put the apothecary white over his shirt. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this paint. White is a strange color to shade, but I actually like it pretty well. I usually do a really thinned out mix of Agrex Earthshade and Nuln Oil if I'm going to do a white, a wash over white. But this is much more whitish gray. I would have never thought of it, but it works pretty good. I like the way it looks. If you let it pool too much, it looks messy. And your priming will be very important here. If you don't have enough white and too much gray, if you're doing a zenithal, it'll look pretty bad. Good enough. All right, what else we got here? Let's throw some wash on the gold buckle. So you can use this contrast stuff as a wash over things like that, but I'm going to use Agrex Earthshade. Alright, let me put a little bit of a highlight on the metal. I'm going to use dark aluminum from that same Vallejo metal color. And if you're doing a lot, I put it on the palette. If you aren't, just brush a little bit off the tip here. Just going to highlight the edge a little. Catching a light, maybe a little on the tip edge, cutting edge. And I'll do a strip up the barrel. Hit the high points of the lock. And the trigger guard. And then because I like shiny, I'm going to go one shade further with the silver. It's duraluminum, just brighter. On the lock. They keep their guns clean, right? There you go. Put some brightness to that metal now. I don't know how well the light is letting you see here. It looks like on the camera is making his face look a little more washed out. Might be a little bit overexposed. And then he could be done. I'm going to put a little bit of a red highlight on his hat. I'm just going to use Citadel layer paint, Evil Sun Scarlet. This can be hard to blend in, so don't do it too dry. But this looks splotchy and meaningless to me. Contrast does a pretty good job, but it doesn't do as good as you could do. Straighten out some of that line between the hair and the hat too. All right. I'm just going to touch up skin a little bit more because I see some thin spots where the white is peeking through. Oh, that's what you don't want to do. That's $5 of paint right there. Oh dear. Skin. Eyes are a little big. Just shrink them down with a little touch up around there. Let's close that. And then the last thing I want to do is do a couple white highlights on his coat to make it a little more interesting to her. Improving my napkin. So you can bring out the creases, upper areas a little bit more pronounced. You don't have to do this, but it makes me feel better about cheating with contrast. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to use them when they came out, but I have come around, and if I can figure out how to make things look respectable with them for half the time, and I have such a backlog of minis to paint, I think they have a place. And I encourage you to try them if you find yourself with more minis than you have time, and more money than you have time. They're pretty expensive. But there's not as many of them as there are the other conventional line, and you don't need to get a base and a shade and a color for each, or a layer for each one like you do with the other Citadel stuff. So I guess it's not as horrific that they're $7 a piece. You notice I bled some blue onto the edge here. All right, this was more than 15 minutes, I'm guessing. Oh my, we're at 45 minutes. I puttered around and talked and spilled things too much. You can do it in less, and I did 3 colors of silver and some base coats and things like that. But that's about done. It's faster for me. Yeah, his face looks quite washed out in the picture. In the camera, it looks like it's a raccoon, but it doesn't look like that in real life. I put a flat coat on this, protect it, and to get that flat finish, for the contrasts tend to be a little glossy when they're done, and it's still drying. But there's how I do it. I'd be happy to hear tips and tricks you guys have figured out using these paints to get more work done. Thanks for watching.